In this episode, we talk with industry legend Thom Panunzio. Getting his start as an assistant at New York City's record plant, Thom went on to work in every facet of the music business. He's produced, mixed, and engineered albums for Tom Petty, Bob Dylan, Joan Jett, Ozzy Osbourne, Bruce Springsteen, Patti Smith, Alice Cooper, and Aerosmith, just to name a few. He helped design the Hit Factory in New York City, A&M Studios in LA, the Thom Thom Club in Santa Monica, and was executive VP for Universal Music and head of A&R at Geffen Records for many years. Thom talks with John and Stewart about his time on staff at the record plant, his favorite mixing desks, his reluctant entrance into the world of A&R, and how the industry and technology has changed over the course of his almost 50-year career.
What brings you to the East Coast?
I'm here doing, I wouldn't know what number it is at this point, another Joan Jett record. It might be like the 10th or something.
Oh my God, that's
crazy
great.
Like that. And very excited about it. And we started last week. She's still rocking, and it's like old times.
Hey, Tom, it's great to meet you, man.
Great to meet you,
We're so honored
Stuart.
to have you.
Thank you.
Unbelievable. We've been, I'm a huge fan, many decades long fan.
Well, I've been really, as I said before, I'm, obviously a Willie Nile fan, and he's still a very close friend of mine, and I love the records you make with him.
Oh, that's great. So, speaking of Willie, you made a record with him.
1980.
Wow.
And I think you've made every record since then.
I think so. In fact, John and I we met on...
Yeah, that's how we met.
On Willie's, when he I guess after Golden Dawn, he went away for a little while.
Yeah.
Went and raised his family.
Yeah.
And then came back, and John and I worked on his Columbia record, and we've been best buddies ever since, right, John?
Yeah.
We got into trouble, but we still,
Good trouble, as John Lewis would say.
Good trouble.
So you're in New York now, huh?
I'm in New York right now. I don't live here any longer. I still have a house in Jersey, and I spend a lot of time here, but for the last 40 years, home has been Malibu. And
wow,
I come here regularly, enough so that I keep a hash pipe outside my window at the hotel, and it's been there for 6 years.
Unbelievable.
Don't tell me where it is, because we'll go get it.
The Thom Panunzio suite.
So what's it like? Is it any different working in New York now for you? After all these years?
No, it really hasn't, because I'm in the same place. I mean, I can't remember when I've worked in a studio other than the Hit Factory in New York. I worked, I went to the Magic Shop because we were working here at Troy's, at the Hit Factory. They still got that Italian thing over me that I can't work anywhere else, But I'm tied to this. I can't
pull you back in.
Can't break the family. Yeah, they always pull me back in. But I went to the Magic Shop, and that was fantastic. I loved that studio. Unfortunately, it's not there anymore. But I became good friends with Steve Rosenthal, who I really like, and he's been working for us for a number of years now. We've been pulling all of Joan's tapes out of Iron Mountain, and he bakes them, and he bakes like nobody else bakes, let me tell you. You can get 5...
And coming from you, that's probably high praise.
He has a method where he bakes it like at 5 different temperatures or something, instead of just one for a certain amount of time. Right. And we've had all the tapes have been, he then digitizes them for us, and everything he's done, he's saved. We had a lot of tapes that were
that's great
in that period where the tape wasn't good. He's got Grammys actually for doing it. He's done Frank Sinatra's and Elvis, everybody. Fantastic guy. But other than that, I only really work here. It's the only place I've worked in. I can't remember it. I think the last place I worked was the big Hit Factory on 53rd Street.
Right.
I had ties here because Eddie Germano, who started Hit Factories, he was the manager of the record plant when I got my job, and he hired me with Roy Cicala. And he left and started the Hit Factory not long after I was there. And I had to leave the record plant only because of the sound had changed. The rooms at record plant were too dead. And it was a good excuse. None of the clients wanted to work there. You know, it wasn't just my call. And I helped Eddie out with the 53rd Street Hit Factory with staff and getting business and stuff, but always kept my loyalty to Roy. But the record plant didn't last forever, and so I've been working at the Hit Factory. I've been involved in a lot of studios in L.A. The first one I helped Shelley and Jimmy redo A&M, and did that for years. And
Amazing.
I was just there, yeah.
it's still one of the greatest studios there is, I think, sound-wise, sonically.
Yeah.
And before I became an executive at Universal, I always worked for Interscope in one way or another, whether producing records, whatever. But at one point I built a studio on the 4th floor, which was basically an A&R floor. And then we built studios, major studios across the street called the Thom Thom Club. Jimmy named it after me, so I took all the heat from Universal, all the money we spent. And they go, ask Tom, it's his club. It's his club, go ask him.
So just going back to when you met Eddie, so I didn't know this, that he worked at the record plant.
Eddie Germano?
Yeah, was he there, John? Was he there when you were there?
No, he was gone by then, yeah.
Yeah, I started at the record plant, I think, in 79, and he was already gone.
So, Tom, when did you start at the record plant?
74.
And was that your entree into making records?
You know, I had bands prior to that, and actually one of them had a record deal when I joined it, and I went into the studio with them, and at that point I had been playing guitar in bands since I could hold the guitar. I saw the control room and the engineer, and I was fascinated by it, and I completely lost all my interest in being in bands. And anyway, I managed to get a tour with a guy named Richie Havens, you may remember.
Oh, yeah.
And went to Hawaii and toured with him and came back, and I didn't have a gig, and just so happens that this girl who lived in my town was the receptionist, and she got me an interview. And I actually didn't get hired for 2 weeks, but I did not leave the building other than maybe to go out on the roof to get some sun for 2 weeks.
Wow.
My father he was in the garment business on 46th Street, so he used to bring my lunch. My mother would pack every day and some clean underwear or whatever. But I did not leave that building until they hired me.
That's amazing.
And who were the first engineers and producers you got to work with?
Well, I guess the first guy I really got to work with was Roy Cicala.
Right.
My job was I ran the tape copy room, and I wasn't even really qualified to do that. Studio D, John.
Yep,
Studio
I remember
D.
it well.
Yep. And he came in. I didn't even know what he looked like for a while. In fact, this union guy, the only thing on the 10th floor was us and local 966, and there was this union there, and every night I'd be in the tape copy room late, and this guy used to knock on the door. He was short, he had a cigar in his mouth, and he'd say, "Play me some of that John Lennon stuff." And I thought it was Roy. So I would play it for a long time, because I heard he was a mean-looking Italian guy. He was actually a very sweet man.
Yes.
But he came and knocked on the door, and he said, "Come with me." And so I knew by that now that this was Roy, and so I followed him from Studio D. Right next door was a real studio, Studio C,
right,
and that's where John worked. And there's a couple steps I remember going up to the studio, and as I went up those steps, it dawned on me, John Lennon's in there. This is his studio. And the door opened up, and there was John standing there. And Roy said, John, this is Thom. He's going to work with us for a while. And I ended up staying on the sessions through that record and into finishing another one. So Roy was really the first guy who, was the engineer when I walked in. But eventually then worked with Jimmy, of course, because he was there, and Jack and Jay. Yeah. Jay called me up one day on a weekend, and he said, hey, we got to do this demo for a coin management. They had Kiss, so they were like a big client, and Kiss worked in the building too. And we got to do this demo for them, and I'm doing it with Jack. I wanted to see if he wanted to come in and assist. And that was really one of the first things outside of working with Roy that I had done.
Right.
They made me eat peyote and locked me in the studio for 4 hours and turned off every light in the place.
Jay did that to me last week, actually.
Last week, he's still doing it.
Right.
Amazing.
It was the greatest happening studio at the time. I mean, Bob Ezrin was in there. Tony Visconti was in there. I even got to work with Lieber and Stoller.
Amazing.
I mean, it was amazing. It was, I couldn't have hit a better home run, getting a job there.
Yeah.
Not long after that, I also worked on the remote trucks. I was really the only guy. Talked to Dave Hewitt just the other day. I called him when I got to town. And he said, you're the only guy that was ever on the remote crew and also worked regularly in the studio. But that was probably the best training I ever had.
Right.
Working with Dave Hewitt on that truck, where you only get one shot. There's no, going back. And, I said everybody should have to do this before they become an engineer.
Yeah. Right.
And he's the king of the road.
So many of the people you just mentioned have been guests of ours.
I know.
When did you make the transition from engineering into producing?
It kind of happened by itself, naturally. I think a lot of people, I kind of got known in New York for being a good engineer, and then a lot of people came to me because they thought I could do both. Right. And they'd only have to pay one guy. So, the transition was it just kind of happened. It's not like I really planned it out or I said it's time to become a producer. And I never stopped engineering. I mean, right. I'm sitting here now, and I've been a producer on every record Joan has made since her second record, but an engineer also. And right. Even though I got the best guys you can find, I still, when it comes to mixing, I usually do the mixing for the most part, and recording, I'm always there for the setup, and I still love it. I consider myself always an engineer as much as, when I was just hired to do production, I still considered myself an engineer,
Right.
Same. Yeah.
Right? Do you still engineer your records?
I engineer still. I mix. When I mix, I mix. I like having my hands on the console. I like adjusting stuff. I pick the mics. I help set up with the engineer who's helping me. But I have my setup sheet, and we put everything up together. And
right.
I mean, it's just part of the DNA,
Yeah.
It's like you don't just forget you're an engineer when you're a producer.
Well, a lot of the great guys didn't. Like
right.
Jack Douglas, for instance, even though he had Jay, or Bob Ezrin. Bob Ezrin could do it all by himself, but,
Yeah.
But they were always involved.
Yeah. I remember with Jack, when I first started assisting for him, if the engineer wasn't in the room, he would just be like normal, like just touching stuff and doing his thing.
Yeah, right. Well, he was a staff engineer there before.
Yep.
He was ever got to produce anything.
Yeah.
So you're looking at old Joan tapes now that Steve digitized, but what's it like going back and looking at these old recordings?
It's been interesting, let's put it that way. I was actually pretty good at documenting, and I was very thorough and organized. So it's not that easy for some of the people that work for Blackheart when they go and they look at Iron Mountain. So they send me pictures, or we do a FaceTime or something, show me the tapes. And as soon as I can see the tapes, I can see, even as an engineer and a producer, I always wrote the back of the box.
Wow.
Right.
As soon as I see that DNU, I know, put that tape away. That's no good. But, nobody else really knew what that meant. And what was the other one? PTM, pull to master.
Right.
But I'm seeing, really the whole history of the song. And sometimes it's Kenny's masterpiece is the song Good Music, which is on the second record I did with him. And it was the first 3-machine mix ever done. I remember Mix Magazine came down. We did it in Studio B on the API, and it was a nightmare because it was hard just to get 2 machines to link up.
Right.
And he got the Beach Boys. This was the big deal. He got the Beach Boys, all the living Beach Boys except for Brian, back together to sing on it.
Wow.
And he brought it, and also Darlene Love, and he pays tribute to everybody on the record. So it's a riff from this guy, a riff from that guy. And I'm going, well, this is going to be the most difficult one to figure out, because I know there's a lot of tracks. It's the only 3-machine mix I ever did. And I think after that, we just waited for the Sony digital machines. We didn't want to try. We didn't want to try it again. It wasn't like something that caught on.
Yeah.
But we had 96 tracks or something crazy. And now I'm seeing all the reels for this song, and it's definitely a flashback. But I'm glad that I was that thorough with my notes, and everything is clearly written out, and you look at the track sheet and it totally makes sense.
And how about the sonics? Like, are you surprised by the sonics of it?
I guess I knew it all sounded good, but now to hear other people saying, wow, that sounds amazing just for a basic track, or just, just for the multi-track, like the guys here, or even Kenny or whatever, remembering. But, we always got great sounds. Not that it was easy, but we had everything we needed in the studio to make it great. And if you didn't make it great with this, you brought in this piece of gear, or you brought in Shelly Yakis or Roy Cicala to help you or something, you know.
Well, I know from being a junior member at that point that I remember learning from you guys all about getting the sound right to tape.
Right.
Like no fixing in the mix. And you said about your notes, I remember learning about the copious notes too, because, a year later, you'd have to figure out what you needed if you needed to pull it. But you guys passed that down, both those things, the taking notes and the getting the sounds. That was like so in the record plant, psyche.
I don't know what was going on when you first joined and you were an assistant, but when I was an assistant and you started to be good, they would give you some kind of date to do. Sometimes it was a freebie, sometimes it was a demo, sometimes whatever. You were not allowed to use EQ.
Oh, wow.
And it was learn how to move the mics,
Wow.
Right.
And I work with a guy here, Kenter, who's staff here, chief engineer of Hit Factory, and the other day we were getting a bass drum sound, and I said to him, are the APIs on it? And because I always use API graphics, I have my own, they have them here. And he said, let me go try to move the mic first. And he went in the room and moved the mic. I mean, nobody does that anymore. And it sounded great. I'm going, and he makes Keith Richards records too, and that's the way Keith would do it. He does it all, real. Yeah. But we couldn't use EQs, so we had to learn how to make it go to tape right. But they were, we used to have the T-shirts that said, we'll fix it when we mix it, because it was like a joke. People would say, oh, we'll fix it in the mix. You can't fix anything in the mix. No. You got to do it now. Now you can fix everything in the mix.
Right.
But back then, you better get some good sounds to start with.
But,
Yeah.
you know, talking of Shelley and Roy and Jay, I mean, that bar was set very high for all you guys. I mean,
Yes.
those guys were making amazing sounding records
Right.
before anyone else. And for you guys, both of you, to walk in there and to have those guys to kind of rub elbows with and learn from and teach each other, that's the phenomenal part of the record plant that you guys all came up with.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I like I said, I feel like I came in towards the tail end, started at 79, you know, became an assistant like in 81, 82. And, you know, the place was gone by 88.
Right.
And I caught the tail end for sure. But yeah, no, I felt very lucky to be in the right place at the right time where Paul Sloman didn't kick me out. I didn't have to live at the place for 2 weeks, Tom, like you did. They just hired me, but I think they hired me because of my connections with my brothers.
Hey,
Right,
John,
right.
John, did you ever assist for Tom?
Yeah.
Yes.
You did?
Yes.
Yeah, of
Yes. He was
course.
a great assistant.
Yeah, we had fun.
Great vibe. Always loved having him in, you know.
Tom, my favorite Tom story, and I think I was the second assistant, Tom, because I think it was a session where maybe Greg Caruso was assisting.
Yeah, I remember
But
him.
my favorite was you guys sent me into that little utility closet in Studio A to get something, and then I got in there and the door closed and I heard some noise and you guys had pushed the couch up against the door, locking me in. And then after 25 minutes, you let me out, but all my Chinese food was gone. And I was like, 22 years old. I was like, well, I'm not going to complain. That's cool. But it was so much fun working with you guys because it was always just, that's the thing. You do great work, but you really have a great time. You know
we
what I
always
mean?
had a good time.
But, John, that's the thing, and we've talked about this. The record plant had a reputation for being pretty crazy and pretty wild, and fire extinguishers and lobsters hanging off the roof, whatever the fucking stories were.
Fireworks.
Guns, whatever. But really the bottom line was that was just a sideshow to the fact that you guys were dead serious.
Oh, yeah. The records that came out of there are legendary. I mean, It's not like it was no happenstance. It was not a joke. It was, but you watch masters do their thing and then you learn from them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But it was a crazy place. We even started a bad enough fire. I don't know if you were there then, John, dropping gallon jugs of alcohol, Molotov cocktails down on a place below us, which we thought was the ground, but it was somebody's roof. And they actually, fire department came and actually closed 44th and 45th Street for hours. And they came into the place looking for us. And we hid for them, but they fined Roy $5,000 and they put a lock on the roof door, and nobody was allowed on the roof anymore. They said they would shut the whole place down if they ever saw anybody on the roof, but they never caught us. But it was really Kenny Laguna's doing.
Kenny Laguna. Oh my God, it was so funny.
But there was a lot of fun. But there was a lot of, we worked hard. I mean, it was not like unheard of to do a 16-hour session.
I remember, and also I remember working with Jack on Aerosmith stuff, and they would show up at that point 8 hours late,
right?
And then you start working,
right.
Which was crazy. So
you didn't have a clock if you worked at the studios. It was always different. There was no okay, this is the time I eat, this time I go to bed, this time I wake up. I remember waiting 3 days for the Rolling Stones, and Andrew Oldham and the Rolling Stones. Yeah. And Carmine Rubino, who was the engineer, went home after a day and a half or something and refused to come back. And after 3 days, they finally walked in, and I was the only guy there.
Wow. Amazing.
But I waited, and they came in, and they had to stall for a few days until Alan Steckler and Alan Klein, who was sitting in the hallway, left because they weren't supposed to be playing on the Metamorphosis tracks because they were now signed to Atlantic, and this was an ABCO project, but they didn't want it to come out kind of unfinished or things that they weren't happy with. So Andrew came in with Keith and Charlie and Mick for a little while, and he had all these overdubs planned. John Phillips came in with an acoustic guitar and was there for 2 days and never took the guitar out of the case. And then they started playing these records that Andrew had made in Italy, this guy with a really high voice that went on for a while, and until these two guys finally left, that they could actually play things themselves, because they wouldn't see it. And I remember somebody looked outside and said, "Hey, what happened to the Allen and Allen?" Somebody else said, "Oh, they walked out of here hours ago. They looked like they were dead. They never, at first they're sitting there in their suits and very proper outside the studio and the bench outside in the lounge. And a couple of days later, there's burger wrappers all over. The tires are down here. By like the fourth day, nothing has even really happened. They gave up. They wore them out, and that's what they were going to do." And Keith looks at me and goes, "Set up for electric guitar." And I'm like, wow, I'm really going to record the Rolling Stones. Up until now, we're doing everything we can to waste time so these guys fall asleep or die or something. But I remember once coming in for a session at 8 p.m., and I walked into the control room, and there was nobody there, and I looked outside, and there was some assistant rolling up the wires, but it wasn't whoever was supposed to be on my session, and I could see he was cleaning up, and I go, "What's going on?" He goes, "Oh, we just, forget who it was, we just finished." I said, "Finished? We're supposed to start in a little while." And he looked at me confused. He said, "No, we started, this afternoon, and we're done." So I go outside and I look at the schedule. I was supposed to be there at 8 a.m., not 8 p.m. I missed the whole day. And I remember going up to Susan Palmer, who did the book, and saying, "Don't ever put my name down that end. Always put it down that end," meaning, I'll come in at night, but not at 8 in the morning. But with Roy, you didn't really have a choice, Roy, it was not a democracy. And he didn't say a lot, but he ruled with a strong hand. And if he said, "You got to do this session," Roy wouldn't let you decide. "Oh, you don't want to go work? Go home." That was his attitude. This is your job. This is what you have to do. So even at a point where you're somewhat successful and have clients and whatever, Roy mattered.
Yeah. Right. So when did you move to L.A.?
I came out, I guess, in 1980. Jimmy and I came out, and we started doing some work. Richard Gotterer asked me to do the second Go-Go's record with him, which was a fantastic time. We did most of it at Indigo Ranch in Malibu, which is a famous old studio. It's burnt down now, but it was one of the greatest projects you'd want to be on. The girls had just sold a couple million records with their first record. They were out of control.
Yeah.
And had money and drugs and parties, and it was just a crazy time. And I'm living on Malibu Beach. And then I ended up staying there to finish a Tom Petty record and to work with Bob Seger. And I didn't get back really to New York for 3 years. And I got married, and within months we were back in Malibu.
Yeah, because I remember at one point you were there at the plant, and then you were gone. And you worked a lot in Studio A.
Right.
That was kind of like your room, that you were always in there doing like amazing stuff, like always like, holy shit,
A was preferred because it was really the only large room. B was an okay room, but if you were recording Bruce Springsteen and his band, you had 7, 8 guys playing at once. You could only do that in A. Right. It seemed like I made most of my records in A. B was definitely a better mixing room, but and C was kind of funky because it was like a homemade board, and it was a small room.
Right.
And the mix room was, in my opinion, a disaster.
But that was Roy's room. So
That was Roy's room with the pyramid and trident board, which I hated the sound of, and a tiny little overdub room. And
yeah.
Speaking of desks and all that stuff, like if you had your druthers, do you have different things you like to track on and different things to mix on, or does it matter to you, like at this point?
Yeah, it does. It always does. I would rather track on a Neve,
Right.
like most of us,
Right.
and then mix on an SSL. SSL is the best tool they ever made. I got the Neve from Montserrat that was in the big room at A&M when Interscope took over A&M. It was taking over everything. And in fact, we were going to have our offices, because at one point there were offices that we had on the lot. And the lot is an incredible historical place.
Charlie Chaplin, right?
Charlie Chaplin lot. So we inherit that, and Jimmy said to me, I want to build studios in the new building. Take enough stuff out of A&M that we can build 2 rooms in Santa Monica. And I was working there at the time, and that was my home, and the people that were there were, I was very close with. So I didn't want to just pull the rug out of everybody, but I knew I had to take the Neve. And everybody wanted that Neve. Rick Rubin used to call me once a week for that Neve. And every week it would go up in price. I said, can't sell it, Rick. I can't sell it, By the time we built the new studio, nobody wanted to work on a Neve. We had Dr. Dre's board in the studio, in the Thom Thom Club, that he mixed Snoop's big records and the Chronic. Wow. So we had a line of hip-hop guys around the block wanting that room. Yeah. And then Ron Fair became president, and he was making records, and nobody wanted anything but an SSL. So at the last minute, Jimmy says, forget the Neve, we're going to get I took one SSL out of A&M. He got another one, and I said, what do we do with the Neve? He goes, it's yours. Just put it in someplace close by, put it in a studio close by that I can justify it being there, and that we could book time there or use it or whatever, and that way, I can please the brass upstairs. Where did that board go? I gave it to Panunzio. It's not going to work. So we tried to do that for a while. Eventually, I just sold it, but everything changed that quickly. From everybody wanting that board. I mean, Rick was only one of many people that wanted it. There were other studios that wanted it, and I partnered it up and built a studio 2 blocks from the studios I was involved in with Universal, that was Frameworks, with my partner Ken Dallinger, and he put an SSL in. He bought an SSL and put it in the building. And we did a lot of work there, and it worked out great. It was a great room, great SSL. He's a great engineer and technician. It was all good. And one day he said, I'm selling the SSL. I go, what are we going to get? He goes, we don't need that anymore. And I'm like, what? And he goes, I got other boards that we can work on, Make a long story short, he sold the SSL. He put 2 Pro Tools controllers in. And meanwhile, we got this big, beautiful room, and, we have some outboard, but not a lot. I still have some Pultecs and Tellys or whatever. And we had just finished, right now, we just started Joan's first electric record. She's made some acoustic records and live records, but first electric record since we made a record back, I guess it was like 2013 or something. And we made the whole record here at the Hit Factory, recorded it here at the Hit Factory, and I took it to California to mix it with Ken at our studio. And we're getting ready to start mixing, and he sells the board. And I lose my mind, and all of a sudden Kenny and Joan are there, and we're ready to mix. And, so I'm learning how to work this Pro Tools controller and making it work. But, at the end of the day, it's really only about two things anyway. I mean, I spent like 30 years of my life trying to get the perfect snare drum sound.
Right.
It doesn't mean shit. It's always has been and always will be about the singer and the song.
Yeah.
And if you got a great song with a great singer singing it great, the rest is all icing on the cake.
Yeah.
And these days, though, I mean, it's a different world. The digital works.
But the interesting thing was, when we did all got introduced to it, it didn't really sound as good as it does now. So there was a sort of a validity towards this. We went kicking and screaming for a good reason.
Yeah.
Yes.
But now it sounds much better, and it's pretty cool. I mean,
it's amazing what we can do now. Let's face it.
Yeah.
I mean, years ago when you mixed a record, it wasn't your responsibility that the singer was singing in time or in tune, and the band, the drummer and the bass were locked together or whatever. You made it sound good. Now you turn in a record that something's out of time or somebody's singing something flat and go, what the fuck are you doing? Because the tools are there. And once those tools appeared, the whole bar went up much higher. We had a much bigger job to do. I mean, it's much easier in a lot of ways. We don't have to risk our lives any longer to punching in and out on people's tapes.
That's right.
But it got better. It was all about, I guess, the A to D hookup. And I remember we recorded a track with Springsteen on a multi-track tape machine and a digital machine. This was before Pro Tools, but when there were 33, 48s, the Sony ones.
Yeah.
And we played it back, and he didn't know what was what, and we asked him which one do you like better. And he picked the digital. And, and I asked him, why do you like that one over the better? He says, it's because when I sit here and hear the band play, and I'm sitting in the control room hearing them play, it sounds more like that. So he was saying it's a better representation of what's real.
Right.
But all of that stuff was, I remember the first, when the first 24 tracks rolled into Record Plant, and Jack Douglas had me set up a 16 track and a 24 track.
Wow.
And we recorded a track, I forget who it was, on that, and we played it back, and I was just too busy getting everything working to really try to decide what sounded better. That was beyond my goal at the time, listening. Jack said, get that machine out of here, and I don't ever want to see it again, about the 24 track.
Right.
Wow.
And he wouldn't have said that if he didn't hear something.
Yeah.
Yeah. I did. I think it was like 2012. I was in Wales, and I did a shootout we were tracking analog with the band, but we were also doing backups in digital and Pro Tools. And we basically had a A/B 2 takes there on 2 different reels, and to pick the master take. So I played one from the analog and the other from the digital just to make it easy, so I wouldn't have to take time switching reels. And we could hear the difference, like between the analog and the digital, pretty good. But at the end of the day, I turned around and said to everybody, no one else is going to A/B them. The record comes out, they're just, people could just hear the music and either like it or not.
Right.
So, you know what I mean? So for me, it was like, as much as I'm analog, if the music's great, nobody cares.
But, the thing for me about moving into the computer, the first thing that really became exciting to me was the recallability. Like, you know, not fucking leaving the studio and going, oh, fuck, the bass is
Have
half
to
a
draw
dB.
pictures of the graphics and
Yeah.
where to put
Yeah.
everything.
Oh, boy.
And,
And, you know, you recall something and it never really,
right.
you know, it was really tricky recalling something. So for me, just the creative part of mixing became so much more fun because A, you can try some shit because you know you weren't ruining the whole date. You
Right.
can always just hit the button, restart again, and figure that out. So that freedom, and you know, the people who are younger kids who are making records now don't remember that feeling of when you left that studio, you had to be clear as a bell that you nailed it. Because, I mean, you guys started before there was automation, right?
I started before there was numbers on the tape machine. How's that? like
There you go.
numbers like a Walkman, you know,
Yeah.
even
Right.
had, you know?
Yeah,
It was
right.
nothing. We used to have to mark the tape.
Right.
Yeah. Literally.
Amazing.
Right.
The whole changeover has been, I think, very appropriate for what has happened with music.
Right.
I mean, nobody, not even the Rolling Stones, you know, all play together anymore when they make a record. That's very rare. Joan Jett does, and that's one of the reasons why I love doing the sessions. Because to me, there's nothing more exciting than coming into a control room and you got a whole band in front of you ready to record, you know, and the interaction of the musicians is the magic.
Yeah.
And you don't get that if you're sitting there with a computer or a drum machine or whatever. But the music has changed. Let's face it. That music isn't what's popular these days.
Right. But has the technology pushed that? Has the technology actually affected the art form?
I think so, because it gave people started using drum machine, I believe, not as a novelty, but because of the sound. And because it was different, and because you didn't have to deal with drummers and everything that went with
Tuning.
that. Yeah, tuning.
Artie Smith. You never deal with Artie Smith.
Right. Out in California, we got J-Mo and the Drum Doctor and all these guys. But the sounds then changed the music.
Right.
The drum machine became popular for all the reasons we just said, and but then that sound was part of the new music, you know, just the way all the effects that Kanye West and all these other guys put on their vocals, all really made the sound of the new pop music that we have these days.
Yeah.
And even the guys that you would think would still be doing it the old way, or say, you know, I say to Motorhead, hey, how do you guys record? We record live. Oh, great. That's fantastic. I love it. You know, you're awfully loud, but, you know, we'll work that out. And, you know, live to them was the drummer going into a room and playing the drums with nobody else.
Right.
You know, that's recording live. And that's a hard rock band.
Yeah.
You know, Joan is really the only person that I've worked with in years that more than two people were in the room at once.
Amazing.
That's great.
Amazing. Well, when you were a kid, what was your, like, did you have a favorite band or did you have a scene that you were into?
Well, I think the first music I got into was instrumental music. At the time, Wipeout and all that stuff was
Adventures,
very popular. And one of my favorite records, if my favorite record to this day, is a Ventures record, Ventures Surfing. And I would listen to all those, and I became a guitar player, so any guitar-driven stuff. But when I saw the Beatles for the first time on Ed Sullivan, it changed my life. And my mother, if she was alive, she would tell you that, you know, now I had a purpose in life, and my goal was... Did
you ever tell John that?
I don't remember. I might have. I did tell him, you know, how much his music influenced me doing what I do, you know, but it was definitely the Beatles. But, I mean, if I go back and listen to a Beatle record, sometimes I say, wow, George was really good, you know, and listen to what he's playing. But also a lot of the records I go back and I listen to, I go, it's so simple.
Yeah.
They're so simple. Right. They don't have all this other stuff that we're putting on. And then you realize what it's really about, you know, the singer and the song. But, I mean, the Beatles' arrangements, and I think the first music that actually I was really interested, other than the guitar sound and part of what was going on, was the Beatles, because it was like there was so much to listen to, and it was so amazing. And I mean, you know, further down the line than I Want to Hold Your Hand or She Loves You, those were pretty basic songs. And those are the songs I would say that I go back and I'm amazed at how little there is and how well they work. But once they started getting, I mean, forget by the time they got to Sgt. Pepper's, but you know, even a few albums in, it was like, wow, they were amazing. And the instrumentation sometimes, you know, the first time I listened to Norwegian Wood, I went out and got a sitar. You know, I mean, seriously, it was like, oh, wow, what's that instrument? That's not a guitar. Where did that come from? What planet? I mean, you know, but it exposed you to so many different things.
The Beatle evolution was so great because, like, literally every 6 months they kicked it into another thing. And for us as fans, it was so fucking exciting.
It was so great.
It was like every 6 months, it was like, whoa. And then, you know, because I started playing guitar too around the Beatles thing. Once I couldn't figure out their songs, I went, or it took me more than just a minute to go, what the hell are they doing? Then I went, wow, these guys are really going somewhere.
Yeah.
And it was the same thing with the Stones. At record after record, they just evolved in a way. And everyone forgets that the Beatles were a band for... They made records for 7 years or something. I mean, think about that. I mean, you know, I used to spend a year getting a kick drum sound.
Yeah, I know. Me too.
And the Stones actually were amazing because they took it like, you know, they did their, you know, his Satanical Majesty's Request after the Beatles did.
Well, it was their Sgt. Pepper. So it was their answer to Sgt. Pepper. Unfortunately, it wasn't received like that, though.
Yeah, exactly. But it's still one of my favorite of their records. I love that record. But the other funny thing was, but then they took it another notch and did kind of like a disco thing.
They
you know what I mean? Which I thought was really ballsy.
I think it was, you know, people say, the Stones doing disco. Those were fantastic songs.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
And it was still the Stones, but you could hear it in Studio 54 or you could hear it in the Mud Club. The Beatles did more different things, but the Stones were able to really go those different genres and make it their music. I mean, there's nothing about any of the disco songs, whether it's Fingertip Fire, whatever that long disco thing they did, or Miss You, or Some Girls, that album.
Yeah,
it's
right.
I mean, they even hit reggae, you know.
Yeah, that's right.
They were the greatest country band in the world, in my opinion.
Right.
They're more authentic than 90% of the country music that's been made since the 50s.
Yeah,
in my opinion, Dead Flowers and all that stuff.
The Girl with the Faraway Eyes.
I mean, so many of their songs are, to me, so authentic, and you know, they know that world as good as anybody, just as the blues.
Hey, Tom, does it blow your mind that you actually got to work with these two bands, or work with elements of these bands?
It's still, it's still. If Keith walked in here right now, it would be like. And I see him all the time here. We share a lounge. You know, I've done some recording with them. I mean, I've worked on some of their albums, live record, Metamorphosis. I've recorded Keith with other people. Same with Jagger or Dylan or any of the Beatles. it's something very, very, very special to me
Amazing.
and to a lot of people.
Amazing.
Not that long ago, Joan was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and the same night, Ringo was, and Paul inducted him. I was there in the room to record the show, and or at least her. And they asked Joan to do to be in the grand finale.
Great.
And I think it was to get by with a little help from my friends. They asked her to do two things. She turned down one, which I couldn't fucking believe. But you know, she's the only one I know that would turn something down with the Beatles. But she wasn't a big Beatle fan. Keith Richards walks in here, and she's like a little kid, you know, and they're like best friends at this point, and there's so much alike. But I went down for sound check for Joan. We did the sound check, went back to my hotel, had some dinner, whatever, convinced John Landau that Kenny Laguna should be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, that it was wrong to leave him out, as Tommy Price was, but I couldn't convince him of that. But anyway, I went back for the grand finale sound check, and I'll never forget, I walked into the big, huge place in Cleveland where they had the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame that year. And it's a really interesting building. There's two stages back to back, one for the big grand room and one for a smaller room. And I walked in the wrong door, and I'm in the smaller room, and there's nobody there, and there's no nothing. And all of a sudden, I hear the Beatles. And so I follow the music, I go out and around, and I walk into the big room, and I'm at the bottom of the stage, which is higher than me. It's like the door I came in. I look up, and there's Paul McCartney and Ringo playing.
Wow.
And I cried, you know. It was
amazing.
You don't see that every day.
Yeah.
But what really blew my mind was after I recorded Joan's performance, they had a place for me at her table, which was the number one table in the place. I sat down after she performed, and we're waiting for them to induct her. So they get up and do their thing, and then they come back, and the table is right next to our table, is right next to the Beatles. And it's Jerry Lee Lewis and a woman, and there's Ringo and his beautiful wife, Barbara, and her sister with Joe Walsh.
Right.
They're at the table also. And we come back to the table, and everybody's in the place is standing up as they come back to the table. And of course, I'm standing up, and they come back. And Paul and Ringo got up and came over and congratulated all of us. They didn't know who came off the stage and who didn't or cared or whatever. But Paul and Ringo come over and put their hand out and say congratulations to me. Was like, you know, I've been in this business since 1974. You know, I'm pretty jaded. But it shook my world, you know. Great. It was like something I will never forget. And amazing. I felt so good that it still meant something, you know. And that night, I hung with Paul and talked to him. Joan threw a party. She rented the House of Blues and threw a party, and everybody came to her party. And Paul did, the Foo Fighters, everybody. But, you know, it's Dylan kind of fits into that category, too. But the Stones and the Beatles. Townsend, you know, I recorded some of the last tour they did and recorded them at Madison Square Garden. Got to have dinner with the same table with Peter, and that was pretty up there.
Amazing.
But you know, it just doesn't go away. You know, the magic that you felt when you were little, I still feel. I had a session in here once. My engineer Kento was doing it, but I came in and was in it for most of the day. It was just after Charlie had passed. And Steve Jordan, who's an incredible producer, as you know, and drummer, plays and produces Keith. Mm-hmm. And so he and Keith and Bernard Fowler, who He was a background singer for 20, 30 years with the Stones. Fantastic guy. Came in basically to rehearse and to learn the songs. Steve, I think, already knew that he was going to be the guy. And so, knowing Steve, he was probably listening to all the Rolling Stones records. But they hadn't been out in a long time, and I guess nobody knew what the set list was going to look like. And I guess Keith felt he needed some brushing up, but it was just basically Keith. I mean, Keith's show was him playing the guitar, Bernard singing mixed parts, Steve playing the drums and practicing the songs that he might have to play, and Keith doing the same thing. And Bernard's calling out this bridge, and because he's got notes in front of him and the lyrics, and he's kind of like guiding everybody. But those moments you don't forget.
Yeah.
At a certain point, you became an executive in the business, right? And
had an office, believe it or
had
not.
an office, but was that a trip for you? Was that like you got to sign bands?
It was a trip. I was the first guy that Jimmy asked to be part of Interscope, and I didn't think it was a good idea. It was like a full-time job. I came to California because of work, but my real reason, and since I was a little kid, was determined to move there because I'm a surfer, and I wanted to surf good waves and become real good. And that was my main mission. And so I never took a job inside, as they say, but I produced records. I was musical director for the Thom Club, which was a universal internet show. Did all kinds of things, built studios, was always working, producing, mixing a band for them. And then one day it was just brought up that I was going to work there. It had been decided for me. And Doug Morris had made the decision with Jimmy, and that I was going to become an employee. And I thought it was going to be a lot different than it turned out. I remember Jimmy calling Jordan Shearer, and was running Geffen Records, and Geffen was about to take over MCA, which was like a hot dog stand taking over a meat factory. It had been decided that I would work both for Interscope and I would help Jordan, who was going to need help. And he certainly did, because at one point I did have about 30 bands that I A&R'd just myself. And it wasn't long after I got in there that I was made the head of A&R. And I was still working on Interscope projects too, but I'm the head of A&R for Geffen Records, and I got a lot of bands. And in the middle of all of it, Nelly Furtado record that I was a producer and an engineer, mixer, whatever, and I did a lot of different things, but mostly A&R did. Blew up, and we sold 10 million records, and she was touring all over the world, which I had to go and doing all kinds of shows. It was a full-time job just doing that. And I had signed on to produce Newfound Glory's record, which I was overwhelmed with just those two things, not to mention all the rest. I had to hire a lot of people, new people to help. I realized after that I couldn't, it was just a little overwhelming, but I decided I couldn't produce another record. I could mix, I could produce a single, but I couldn't produce another album while I was holding this position. Yeah. But I remember Jordan saying to me, I hope when you pick your office, it's on this side of the building, meaning his side of the building, the Geffen side, meaning, I really need you over here. And I was like, office? I really wasn't counting on having an office. This is maybe going a little too far. Up until now, the studio has been my office. That's where I was all the time anyway. I had built the room, the only existing room at that time. We hadn't built the Thom Thom Club yet. So it kind of evolved into a much more executive role. I oversaw all the expenses for everything Geffen, and then everything A&M also, which was not something I do. I'm not good at math, and I was working with the admin woman as much as I was working with producers and artists,
Did you have to listen to mixes?
Oh, I listened to everything. When I started and we took over MCA, it was like, really being thrown into the fire. I had bags in my office, big garbage bags full of cassettes, CDs, reel-to-reel tapes, finished records, demos. Some bands were in the process of making a record. Some bands were about to start their first record. Some bands was about to start their 10th record. Every possibility. And basically, not that my decision was final, but there was all these bands that nobody really had made a decision on, if this record was going to come out, if they were going to continue making records, if this demo that got them a record deal is really good enough. And so what I decided was that this is real important decisions and it's people's lives.
Yeah.
That I wasn't going to make a decision on any band because I couldn't tell. You can't tell anymore what really happened because so much of it can be done with a computer or other people or whatever, that I wanted to see every band that I had to make the final call on. So I was going out seeing like 3 bands a night. And that was pretty much my job for quite a long time. It was to take the MCA roster, and then we inherited right on top of that DreamWorks, and I took a lot of the DreamWorks acts. Like Nelly Furtado wasn't going to go anywhere. And I said, this girl is great, and she's already had one big hit. And that's where I put all my eggs really in that basket at that point, and became very involved in the record to the point I was working on it. I was A&R'ing in it. I spent 3 months in Florida with her, and it was a home run, luckily. But there was other bands that didn't make it, and that was probably the most difficult thing I did, was those decisions. I don't think I missed on any of them. Maybe a couple I should have let go. That's, for sure. But we didn't let go of anybody that turned out to be a big star. And we go, oh, shit,
right.
We didn't let go of Lady Gaga,
Right.
even though somebody did, but not me. But then, then we got into the studio whole thing, and that was part of my job too, putting this whole studio together. And there was all kinds of, architectural meetings, and Vincent Van Huff and these guys are all, part of my life now. And
right.
So it was a lot of different things. But at the end, I didn't enjoy being there anymore. The music had changed. When I came in, I was a big shot right off the top in the building, because I was already in with all the big shots. Doug Morris and everybody knew me and loved me just because my relationship with Jimmy. So I knew a lot of Brenda Romano for years. I knew her, who ran radio, and Steve Berman, who was head of promotion. These were already my friends. But as time went on, music changed. I became, I felt not comfortable with some of the acts I was handling. Nellie, I loved her more than anybody, and she was the greatest. And even though it was a little bit different music than I was used to, it worked for me. But it started to completely go the other way, and rock music was really being put in the back. Nobody cared. We'd have 4, 5, 6 hour meetings every week, every Friday morning, staff meetings. And we'd talk about everything, and then they'd leave like 20 minutes to talk about the rock music, when most people were ready to leave anyway, and most of them did, because they had nothing to do with rock music.
Right.
I spent a lot of time working with Death Row. I was the only guy that was in with those guys, and I traveled with them, and I was in the studio with them, and with Snoop and Dre, and not Tupac. By the time Tupac came in, that was already kind of Suge and Jimmy's relation was falling apart, and but that was a totally different world. I mean, that was like Suge was as everybody knows, he was a real gangster. He was a real threat to a lot of people's lives. He did things differently. The rule was that you can never get in the car with them. That was the rule the wives made. But at one point we had bulletproof vests.
Wow.
And at one point, a couple of points, things got very, very dangerous, just because of the situations they would be in, and the other gangs, and the rivalries, and it was that was like another whole world in itself, But by the end, the music, most of the music wasn't something that I was really loving, and I didn't play a big role in it anymore. And it just became time that it was all closing down anyway, because they were going to bring Lucy in, and Jimmy was going to leave and collect $1 billion for his beats. And so I got out before he did, so he could pay me for years to come, but which I wouldn't have gotten if I would have stayed there. But
good move.
Yeah, no, but it would have happened anyway. I mean, everything was kind of changing drastically. And as soon as I got out, I talked to Kenny, every week anyway, and they really didn't do a studio record the whole time I was an executive, and I was under contract that I couldn't do a record with somebody outside of the Universal.
Right.
And that, they turned their back on, and Jimmy didn't care, Doug didn't care if I was if I mixed a song for Joan, or if I did some live recording for somebody or whatever, but to produce a whole record, get involved in a whole record, that wasn't going to fly.
Right.
Yeah. Now here it is, I'm open, and I called them up. He goes, well, that's great, because we're ready to do another record. And it was literally a couple of weeks before I came back to New York, and we came in here and we started another record. And it hasn't stopped since then. I've worked with a lot of other acts, but Joan could be a full-time job, Yeah. And it is, really. So back where I started, and I feel much better, and I don't have to listen to music I don't like.
And you don't have to wear a bulletproof vest.
That's it.
Bulletproof vest.
Oh my God!
Wow, man, Thom,
Crazy.
really, this has been so great getting to talk to you.
Thank you, Thom.
Well, it's been my pleasure. It's great to talk to you guys. And
I know.
See you again, John. Yeah.
I've been smiling for the last hour and 45 minutes.
So have I.
It's so great to so many great memories, and it's just great to see you right there, and everything is good.
It's great to have you part of this, and because you were a part of it.
No, I can't thank you guys enough for
and thanks
the
for all the
knowledge.
beautiful music, Thom.
Yeah.
We've listened to it. We're a huge fan, and keep it going, man.
Well,
keep feeding us.
You guys too, man. You guys are both, doing great stuff too, and
Trying.
Not a lot of the guys were as talented as you and me, John, that aren't doing it anymore. We got lucky.
Yeah.
There was a thing.
Really
There was a thing there for a while that changed, where if you were a staff engineer, when I started, people used to come to the record plant and say, "Who do you got for me to work with?" Or I want to work with Jay Messina, and Jay would do the whole record. It wasn't a world of specialization where you would go to here to track and here to do the overdubs, and then you'd get Claire Mountain or somebody to mix it, And we got clients just because we worked at Record Plant, and I got a lot of clients while I worked at Record Plant, which hooked us up. But Gray, who was fantastic, Jim Ball, who was fantastic. Both of those guys did a lot of records with me. They never, it seemed to be a cutoff point where people stopped. It became a world of specialization in every way. Yeah. But you couldn't just get work because you worked at the studio. And I think we were lucky that we
absolutely
that we're still doing it. You know, I know I am.
Oh no, me too. I mean, I think this year, 2023, is my 40th anniversary.
Wow, really?
So I started engineering in '83.
Okay.
Yeah. So
I'm about 49 years.
Yeah, you're ahead. But I mean,
old,
for me,
I'm older.
Oh boy, yeah, we all are.
Well, keep it going, and we look forward to everything you do, Thom.
Well,
thank you.
Great to talk to you guys, and thanks for having me.
Really beautiful.
Have a great session today.
Yeah, man.
Thank you.
Thank you, Thom.
Honored to have you, Thom.
Over and out.
For extras from the episodes, like playlists, links, and videos, head over to gearclubpodcast.com. Sign up for the newsletter, and come say hi and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Gear Club Podcast. Thanks for listening.
And please, if you like what you hear, let us know and leave a review.